The culmination of the inner healing psychology and counseling was I met with a counselor and with a friend who'd become my pastor in the community, and he had a gift for healing, for praying with people and helping them feel better and helping me feel better and listening to me. He was intellectual. We could argue about Marx and anarchism at the same time. We could talk about woundedness and brokenness. And in this healing session with my counselor and him, we visited at that point I thought, this is it. This is where it happened, when this abusive incident with my father. I was walking home from kindergarten, and this was in the small town of 3,000. I talked about the bullies in Chicago, but small towns had bullies too. And I was being picked on. This kid was following me. He was hitting me. He was, saying, "You fucker," and "You shithead," and he was the bad kid in the room that everybody hated. And I got beat up and came in. I got to the front door, put my hand on the door, and I turned around and said, "Well, you're a fucker too," and then opened the door, and guess who's there? Dad. Pentecostal preacher's kid used the F word. First time in his life, last time as a kid. I was beaten so bad. There were small welts and bruises, but I basically just kind of laid on the bed and just felt like I was destroyed. My mother came into the room and said, "Charlie, I know your dad gets angry and gets carried away with the spanking, but if you just don't fight him, just let him do it, it won't hurt. It'll be over quicker." There's a phrase in inner healing work called enabling. Codependency. So that's what I did. I took my pacifism and used it to shut down my pain sensors, and I just basically, and Mr. Spock helped too, and I just froze and would just let him spank me anytime he did, and didn't pretend it, just didn't act. And my brother would remark about this. He said, "Charlie, I could not understand what you were doing." Because my brother always fought. He always fought the spankings. I never did after that point. So I'm in this inner healing session with my pastor friend and my counselor, and we're talking about that, and I'm laying on the floor, and my eyes are closed, and we're revisiting it, and I'm telling the story, and I said, "I don't know why this is tearing me and holding me back," and at one point, my friend, the pastor friend, he said, "Well, Charlie, what did you do or say before you started following your mother's advice?" And I just started tearing and said, "Daddy, please don't hit me. I'll be good. I promise I'll be good, Daddy." I was probably 6 years old, and I stopped fighting my father at that point. And it had resulted in all the depression and the anger. It would be one way to end the story, to say I went on and lived happily ever after that. And that I didn't suffer from depression, but actually I continued to suffer from depression. But I was a different person, and I thought about things differently. All of a sudden I realized that I could stand up for myself, and I could take charge of my life at levels that I sort of yielded. And one things I did about a year later is I started taking Prozac. Because, God's supposed to heal depression, not doctors. But I had to turn to Prozac, and within 3 months I felt like I was cured. And I have not taken an antidepressant. I took one more antidepressant. I got off Prozac because I started having some side effects that were really, So I went on another one, but I only stayed on that a month, and then I went off. And I have not had to go back on an antidepressant since then, and that was 11 years, 12, 13 years, because it was before I came to Northside meeting, 14 years, that I haven't needed an antidepressant. Um, I started to put my life back together because with the depression, I kept losing jobs. I'd work a year, quit. Work a year, get fired. Work a few months, quit or get fired, over and over again, based on this anger, frustration, inability to deal with authority, so on. But after the Prozac, I started to be more even. But then all of a sudden I had this mysterious fatigue that came over me. And I couldn't get out of bed most mornings. And I wasn't depressed. My mind was actually quite active and relatively content, but I didn't have the energy to do more than crawl over to my little computer and type up an email or something. And this was about the time I was leaving Reba Place, leaving Living Water Community, realizing I wasn't a Mennonite. My theology was changing. I was becoming, oh my God, a liberal. And I mean, I'd been a liberal, but I was a radical, not a liberal. It's a way of eliding the difference. So anyway, I came to the Northside meeting in August of '97, and I was still under this fatigue. And I attended one meeting for worship and said, I like this. I'd actually attended a meeting for worship in Decatur on a visit a few years prior to that, but I was still a pretty strong Christian at that point, and this didn't seem Christian enough. So while I visited Northside while I was still under this fatigue, and at this point I was post-Christian. It was clear to me that I wasn't a Christian anymore, even though Jesus still meant a lot to me, and being a Pentecostal meant a lot to me, and it made me who I was, even though I was no longer believing in the doctrines. And this is where the unspiritual may start coming in. I found out, my wife had been working at one place and we didn't have insurance, so she changed jobs at some point around the August date that I visited the meeting, and we got on health insurance, and so I went to see a doctor and said, I'm terribly fatigued. I don't know if this is depression, a new form of depression, or something different. I was, we tried several things. I visited him about 3 or 4 times, and finally he tested my thyroid, which is about the third thing you do when you're dealing with a case of fatigue. And turns out that was it. He said I had the worst case of hypothyroidism he'd ever seen. So I got on hypothyroid medication and started coming to Northside regularly. Chris came with me, became pretty integral to his life too. And that's almost like the rest is history. Because I've been with this meeting coming up on 12 years. It's hard. I don't know if I want to talk about the God piece of this, because I do identify as a non-theist, but that word doesn't quite capture what I think being spiritual is about. It's, I still want to be a preacher, and I still want to save the world, which I got from my dad and I got from the peace movement. And Quakerism says everybody's a preacher, everybody's a minister, and we're out to save the world, so to speak. I think at that point I'm ready to just kind of let people ask questions if they want.